Good morning and welcome. Afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. In our very global satellite industry, I'm based here in Washington, D.C., so we're still about mid-morning. I have the pleasure of kicking off GVF's Beyond 2020 New Application, New Growth, which I believe is the first webinar of this year. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm joined by some great colleagues that will be talking today about kind of how 2020 was, cover a little bit about the impacts of COVID-19 and what's that meant for kind of our business and our companies. And then moving into what we see the future of new applications, new growth segments, Leo, flat panel antennas, new markets being open, the realization that connectivity is really important and that satellite has a key role to play. So I think with that, I'd like to kind of introduce our panelists here. My name is obviously Brad Grady. I'm a principal analyst at Northern Sky Research, focused on mobility and government military markets. I've been at NSR for about 10 years. The Medic Director of Product and Global Commercial Services at Telesat, Simon Gray, Senior Vice President of Civil Government from Eutelsat, and Joe Delore, VP Market Strategy and Development from ST Engineering iDirect. So I think with that, I want to ask our first question, which is really kind of an overarching theme that we've been asking ourselves here, of that 2019 was a pretty good year by almost all accords. Lots of strategic transactions that occurred, lots of revenue growth. Launches were reaching record highs, really. And satellite-based services were really starting to reach kind of a technical and economic parity with their terrestrial counterparts. So Joe, maybe we'll start off with you. And I'll ask, looking back to 2019 and into 2020, how is your business performing, and kind of what did you have in the works before COVID-19 hit?
Yeah, thank you, Brad, and thank you, GVF, as well, for hosting this panel. It's an honor to be part of this. So I'm Joe Delore. I'm the Head of Market Development and Strategy at ST Engineering iDirect. So I've been around for some time, coming from NewTek before we merged. And that's also a bit how we see it when we look at what happened, of course, in 2019 and 2020. First of all, of course, nobody could imagine what a global pandemic would mean to our lives and to the industry, the satellite industry, of course. But when we came together end of 2019, iDirect and NewTek, that was just at the start of 2020, right? So we were in the beginning of a joint company. And at that time, the pandemic hit. So we are combining our talent, our portfolios to address the fast-changing SATCOM market and deliver the technology innovations to the market. But because together we represent the broadest portfolio to address the different vertical markets. And so we started this process end of 2019. And then, of course, pandemic hit and it kind of changed the way of working, the way of doing business, but luckily we had already progressed far enough so that we could cope with that. And of course, 2020 had its challenges, but yeah, it has been a very busy and rewarding year in the end for us. So it was a good year. So we had a good response as well to address the COVID challenges to that with our customers, our employees as well, finding new ways of working to be able to move things forward. And we saw some good examples of COVID response in the satellite market as well. So we saw an increase in emergency response services. We saw an increase in high connectivity solutions, 4G combined with satellite with our hybrid IQ LTE modem to address that. So we saw an increasing capacity demand in enterprise and cellular backhaul. As well, expansion in USO programs. So of course, it was a hard year. It was a tough year, I think, for everybody in industry. But I think we have been able to cope with that by adapting our way of working and still make it a good close out of the year, I would say.
Yeah, no, great, Manik. Maybe we'll look at you. So I think Telesat's been obviously going on this campaign of launching Leo and those sorts of things. So kind of walk us through maybe how that's been progressing and some of the impacts from COVID-19 and what you expect to see in 2021.
Sure. Thanks, Brad, and thank you for hosting this panel. 2020, from our Leo plan perspective, was a year of finalizing our entire ecosystem. So we spent a lot of time finalizing, doing a lot of studies and joint studies, not just from the satellite perspective, but from our landing station or gateways, as well as modems and antennas. So kind of even the OSS, BSS, the entire network that would be needed to build it up. So we've reached all the major vendors that we are going to be working with. So that was where we spent most of 2020 to down select our preferred vendors. So 2021, our focus would be on announcing to the world who our preferred vendors are across this entire block, and to get work started actually on the Telesat Leo constellation. Just one other major event from 2020, because I heard both you and Yo mention about how the pandemic highlighted the need for more connectivity and the importance of satellites. Another major announcement in 2020 for us, for Telesat Leo specifically, was the Canadian government's announcement of the Universal Broadband Fund to connect every Canadian household. And they've selected Telesat Leo to be the major partner for their future universal broadband program when Telesat Leo comes live. So that was on the market front. That was an important achievement we had in 2020, and we hope to continue doing more of that in the new year.
Yeah, no, great. Now, Simon, I think you've been on sort of the forefront in your role at Eutelsat here. Why don't you walk us through some of the things that you've been experiencing in 2020 and 2021?
Sure. It started as an unusual year for the industry when you had a number of Chapter 11s being announced. I think Eutelsat is very lucky to have some very secure financials, some very stable financials in this world. And also we were wise or lucky, or whichever word you want to say, not to be too exposed to the verticals that went into the toilet, like the cruise industry, shall we say. And we've been recommended as investment grade compared to a number of other operators. So I think that stability for us has proved very good at this point with the pandemic. The pandemic introduced us to a number of unusual opportunities. For example, we had a number of our pay TV platforms coming to us saying they have no sports. Can we turn the sports channels, which could be 11, 12, 15 channels, into educational channels? So that a number of countries now around Europe, Africa, Middle East have, for instance, 4 to 8 hours a day for each age group on our pay TV platforms. So that was something that we could set up within a week sometimes. So suddenly, simply because no government has a plan B for homeschooling, no government in the world has connectivity for homeschooling, how are you going to get media-rich material to your students at home? So satellite TV came to the rescue in a number of instances. It's also been a year for us of starting with our new products. We have an IoT product range designed for specifically operating over satellite. So we released one of our first products there. And we are now in the process of launching a extremely low orbit mini satellite ELO project, which is basically IoT over LEO satellites. And that's going to be fascinating. And we also launched Connect, which is an HTS. So that's our second dedicated HTS. And this one is over Sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. So suddenly we are opening the services on that from now, really, across Sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. So, it was an unusual year. I wouldn't say it was not stressful. It was certainly stressful. But I think we're in an extremely strong position when you consider the appetite or the push there is for consolidation within the industry. There we go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those are really kind of the key things that have been going on. So I want to ask the audience, please please use the interface to ask questions. We've already gotten a couple of questions, so we'll get to those. But be involved, ask questions, and we'll get to them, or we'll respond to them after, and you'll be able to see them when the video is posted. So I want to focus a little bit on a couple of major themes that came out in the introductions. One is distance learning. Simon, I think you hit on that, and we've heard other operators that kind of announce those same programs on, repurposing and reusing their capacity to provide distance learning and education activities. Rural broadband funding and all those other kinds of things have always been kind of stuff that's happened, and it seems like the pandemic kind of solidified the importance of those efforts. IoT, obviously, another big thing that's kind of been going on, and cellular backhaul. But I wonder has the pandemic in kind of 2020 sort of solidified thinking around having these kinds of networks that are flexible enough to be repurposed for these uses? Disaster planning has always been this kind of secondary or tertiary goal and objective for a lot of civil governments and disaster things around the world. So I'm wondering, have you noticed a sea change in the conversations that you're having of, okay, we have to respond today, but maybe we're going to build capabilities and experiences for the future? And Manik, maybe we'll start with you, and we could talk a little bit about, Canada's investment in that and kind of capacity building those efforts.
Right, sure. So, but more directly to your question, because it's the impact to the business here and now as well, which with our current geo business, a lot of our customers we've seen have shifted some of the capacity. Our customers are primarily service providers and telcos. They've shifted the capacity that they had estimated would be used for the aero or for the cruise markets, and now the demand went down there. They moved that capacity towards use cases like you're mentioning, rural broadband, or for sudden requirements for other communities and so forth. So that helped buffer or cushion the shock a bit and managing that capacity and seeing that shift across the markets. But certainly, Brad, it has definitely solidified the plans, and it highlighted the need for here and now solutions of how to make that happen. The US RDOF was another big example of that. It started way before, but still, because of the pandemic, I think the importance of that came into more highlight. What we are also seeing is it's also the quality of connectivity that regulators are more concerned about. It's not just a speed question. For example, FCC put down a latency criteria for the connectivity as well. It was, give good speeds, but also give below 100 milliseconds of latency. So the discussion is more on quality of connectivity, not just connectivity for connectivity's sake.
Yeah, no, awesome. And so we have a question from Peter DeSeldine to you, Simon, specifically about the switching the capacity to sport distance learning applications. And his question is, when a customer is used to broadcast sports switches to distance learning because of COVID, is the contract with you modified substantially? Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the business impacts of how that happens? And did you have to kind of get handshakes from everybody involved, or how did that work out?
It depends on which country you're talking about. At some points, it was a CSR project on our behalf. On other points, it was a government asking a public national broadcaster. And on other parts, it was a commercial private broadcaster who was working with the government. I don't think I can remember that we were asked to reduce, our particular bill for X number of megahertz by very much at all. And I think that people saw that sports were going to come back, so they would keep that format. So no, I don't think it impacted the bottom line. I think there were some very late nights where we were discussing exactly how it's going to match up. And also then it's a question of how you get the return path. It's not just a question of the forward path. It's a question of how you get the students to communicate with the teachers. And at that point, it became interesting because, how are you going to Wi-Fi up a village? How are you going to do that and do it within the next 2 weeks, as an example? In the Caribbean, we had the whole north side of an island was isolated, had no internet connectivity at all. So it wasn't just the contract with the broadcasters, it was also the return capacity and so on that was interesting. I mean, going back to your earlier question, the changes I've seen, like Manik's mention of the Canadian Rural Broadband Fund, we're seeing now that politicians, for possibly the first time, are seeing the value of satellite. So, for instance, Thierry Breton, who's the EU Commissioner for, I think, Technology, made a very big point of Europe needs to have its own secure SATCOMs. And for me, that's a huge shift. That's a political shift, and it's a recognizing that if you want to have broadband, you want to have it in a reasonable time frame, you have to deploy satellite as part of the plan.
Yeah.
And I found that great for the industry.
Yeah, no, and I think we're hearing that conversation points from a lot of people, you know, and maybe we can kind of attribute some of that to, you know, the awesome social media status of Elon Musk and the Billionaires Club bringing attention finally to the satellite markets. You know, it's all near and dear to our hearts, but you talk, you know, usually when you tell people you work in the satellite industry, they're like, oh, can you get me HBO? Can you do this? Can you do that? Okay. But Joe, I want to focus a little bit on you, and we have a question here, and I'll start with you, and everyone else can kind of contribute their answers. But the question is, can you expect global Leo constellation service start? What will be the impact to HTS? I think you are kind of in both areas, in kind of the geo camp and the non-geo camp. So can you talk us through how that works and what your thinking is from ST?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think it's a good question, right? Because there's a lot of things moving in our industry, both in LEO as well as in GEO, as in MEO. So there's investments on all the sides. And what we also see happening, and that's, I think, the good part is that, yeah, our innovation in space is incredibly these days, right? And it's driven, whether it's LEO or GEO, it's driving innovation forward, which will be beneficial for all the segments of the industry. And that's the good thing, because the same type of capabilities in terms of flexible satellites, which are used for let's say, MEO, are applicable to GEO and fly into LEO and the opposite as well. So it's really driving the innovation in space. And I think the pace that we are getting in terms of innovation is incredible to that. Because think about it, that we are now at the point that satellite operators have access to fully programmable satellites, right? Which they can purpose for VHTS, for wide beam communications, and so on. So it's really a time of new space innovation at a pace that we have never seen before, to address all the different markets that we are serving in the different orbits. At the same time, also the telco and the IT industry is moving forward very rapidly with the 5G architectures, let's say, and the telecommunication standards to that as well, how we will roll out networks, how we will orchestrate and automate service provisioning. I know for Telesat, for example, the standardization, Metro Ethernet Forum, all these elements are key. And then the third element, of course, is that the ground segment technology needs to enable all these innovations as well and bring it together, right? So that's a key element for us, and a key focus is that we are the technology enabled that connects the new space to the telco and the IT infrastructure, and that's what we call the new ground, right? That's the innovation that enables to bring those three together. And for us, that's both in LEO as well in GEO, because we see a purpose for all of them, and there's not a single one which is fit for all the purposes also, right? And for us, the new ground is critical, and to bring our customers and our partners forward so that they can take benefit both of GEO as well as other orbits is crucial for our company, and that's what drives us.
Yeah, no, and I'll ask an anonymous question here, Manik, to you. It says, after the iDirect NewTek merge, Comtech almost bought Galat. They started 12 months, yada, yada. But the real question is can you elaborate on the impact of manufacturers' mergers over your internal decisions? So, you know, Joe over there at ST NewTek, they're merging. That kind of, you know, sent maybe a couple of ripples. Maybe if you're Panasonic, that's okay, because hey, nothing changed, right? It's the same company now. But I'm wondering from a satellite operator perspective, just with how tightly everything has to be integrated these days, what was kind of your decision calculus? Maybe we can throw in, Google Loon and their closing, and you have a relationship there with them, and how's that maybe going to impact? So.
More generally, Brad, on your question about what's happening in supplier or the ecosystem consolidation, because Telesat relies on partnering. We are not an end-to-end manufacturer. We don't manufacture any component in-house. We see that for future systems to be capable, yes, the innovation agenda has to be pushed forward, but also the economic agenda has to match the innovation agenda. And with the companies coming together, I think it's helping them also drive the right amount of scale so that they can get the best of both. You get the best brains together to drive the innovation, but also you have enough scale together so that you're able to have a viable business case. So that's definitely a positive we are seeing. It hasn't impacted our plans in any way. In fact, it's a net positive that we are seeing. You can give a solid contract to one entity who has kind of the best innovation roadmaps under one roof now.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, I guess to follow up on that briefly, is it a benefit because now you kind of can go to one person and they can offer different solutions to different product lines? Whereas before you kind of had to stand up an iDirect hub, you had to stand up a NewTek hub, you had to stand up, all these different hubs if you want to do like mobility versus backhaul versus consumer broadband. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that is exactly that's one thing. And then also one pet peeve that customers had was a different kind of closed systems of how do you move across them if your business decisions change. The answer was, have open standards. But it's very difficult to drive innovation and open standards on the same path. So at least with some level of consolidation, it becomes more easier to not have many siloed closed ecosystems. At least you have fewer to start with, and eventually we'll get to an open standard. And that's the panacea, right? Everything is open standard, everything is interchangeable, but it's easier said than done. So I think we're getting there, but I think it's in the right direction. We don't see that. But there are a number of new antenna companies also coming up, so they are driving the innovation engine as well. So for some part of the ecosystem, more in the established space, consolidation has helped. Whereas where you need at the early stage of the innovation, say for antennas, there's a lot more new companies that are coming. Eventually, maybe they'll get to a consolidation phase, but for now, we don't see the innovation being hurt in the antenna ecosystem. A lot of players are doing very interesting things.
Yeah, no, Simon, maybe I'll kind of ask you a similar question from your side of how kind of consolidation in the industry is impacting your plans. I mean, you just launched Connect and kind of got out of KSAT. How do you see those sorts of things developing in your business plans of this consolidation across the technical side of the business?
I think we're too small. Whether you discuss equipment manufacturers, for example, the CEO of SatXFi made or wrote an article, and he was saying that consumer flat panels are years and years away. I mean, consumer panels in $300 range. Simply because we need dedicated chipsets, we need dedicated software, hardware, and we need to be moving units in the millions per year. And his estimation was we won't get a consumer flat panel until the late 20s. And for me, that's one issue, is that the industry is too small. And I think if you look at Starlink, for example, I think I've seen some estimates of their antenna at like $2,500 is the real price. That means they're subsidizing it by $1,900 every terminal, and they've ordered 1 million. That means that they're subsidizing the antennas by nearly $2 billion before they even think about making money. So for me, I'm thinking that if you're subsidizing each terminal by $1,900, that means you're not making money for maybe 4-5 years. I don't know, conservatively. I've got no visibility on their budget, but maybe we're just thinking too small as an industry. Maybe it's that if you look at a Leo fleet in the thousands is simply a business expense. okay, like a fleet of trucks. The fleet of trucks deliver somebody else's parcel or mail, fine, we will earn a little money on that, but the main purpose of these trucks is to deliver your product, shall we say, Amazon's product. So at that point, these Leos aren't designed to make money. They're designed to service a larger business. And at that point, you start thinking, wow, well, then the satellite industry becomes globally strategic. And its importance its importance to politicians, etc., becomes much more visible. So I think it will be very interesting to find out exactly what happens.
Yeah, follow up on one of the things you opened up with was the focus on IoT. I wonder a little bit if IoT kind of has that story to tell of, the pipe is kind of a commodity and it's just a reason for a solution, right? Or it's just a piece of the solution. But the real value is in the data, is in the analytics. We see this on the Earth observation side. We see this from service providers, Inmarsat, KVH, Marlink, you name it. They all have some sort of IoT focused strategy, and that's usually the strategy is let's not talk to the person who owns the ship. Let's go talk to the engine manufacturer. Let's go talk to the bridge equipment manufacturer, or on the aircraft the engine company, or the airframe manufacturer. All those other kinds of things. So how do you see your IoT strategy kind of developing into that context? And is there a Leo play there or anything else? How do you see that developing?
Oh, me again. Sorry,
yeah,
Simon.
Yeah, Simon.
Okay,
Yes.
Yeah, sure. No. Well, IoT for me is the perfect business case for Leo. Perfect. It's often thin routes. It would depend on how many orbits you were thinking of, in the sense of you would certainly need a low Earth orbit for that very low RF power budget. And at that point, you could have very small, very inexpensive sensors that are just sensing fire in Australia or flooding or whatever. And it's just a one-way kind of connection. That for me is a perfect vertical for Leo. And then you have obviously at higher orbits, so that you don't have tens of thousands of Leo craft. You could then be looking at specialized broadband, which is the UN, military, whatever. I think that one certainly would be commercially viable. I think Eutelsat sees the business case in those two parts of Leo. It's the low orbit and multiple thousands of satellites that we don't particularly see the commercial argument without some kind of public-private partnership.
Joe, maybe from your perspective, how do you see terminal prices and kind of the solutions that you need to bring to the table kind of impact in that, that area, right? Because you obviously can't have the really fancy backhaul modem when you're doing IoT applications.
No, exactly right. And this has always been a bit the challenge, I would say, from our SATCOM perspective, right? How can you serve the IoT requirements with the kind of attractive and affordable terminal to that? Because let's face it, right? The traditional VSAT terminals with a parabolic dish, and even if the cost is attractive, the form factor is not attractive and things like that. So this has been a challenge, and there has been great moves forward on that side. So we are launching, and this is one of the elements that was slightly delayed as well because of COVID, but we are launching an IoT solution exactly like that, which has a very compact and affordable terminal, which is kind of it's like a box size. It's very small. It's a steerable antenna inside as well. It's kind of a small flat panel antenna. So it's very easy to install, can be used in a fixed and a mobility environment. So this is really a game changer to enable this kind of narrow band IoT connectivity. And like you said before, it's to collect the data, it's to use the data, right? The value is not in let's say the bits connectivity or the bits per second, but it's the fact that you can access the data, aggregate the data, and bring it to the party who needs the data and can to create value out of that, right? So that's the solution that we are offering to our existing customers and partners, right? So that they can enable their networks and use their existing investments to also access the IoT market within their customer base with these very affordable and small scale, easy to install terminals. And we have seen good response into that from an enterprise market in utilities, in mining, agriculture, oil and gas, but also in the maritime market. There's also need for this type of very affordable connectivity, as well as in liability, because that's also a market which was difficult to address, right? Because you need very specialized antennas, expensive antennas, and now with these type of small form factor terminals, you can also address the land mobility markets in a better way.
Yeah. Oh, great. So everyone that's following along at home, please keep asking your questions. We got lots to go through, so lots of great topics. Manik, I'll transition to you, but I'm going to add in one more dimension. So we got a question, one of the very first questions we got, and I've been holding on to it right now. What is the role of video in LEO programs, specifically OTT, I mean, maybe DTH even, but kind of contrast that for the data-focused application conversation on IoT and video.
Okay, from a linear video or from a broadcast perspective, at least the Telesat Leo constellation is not intended. We are not focused on that use case or application. We believe the geo architecture is still the best solution for that, and our current geo fleet will continue addressing that. So our Telesat Leo focus will be on two-way applications, internet applications. Yes, to the extent that you need an IP video connection to see Netflix or over-the-top kind of applications, we treat that more as a data application than traditional video. Of course, that would very much happen on Telesat Leo.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, that's always the dilemma we have, at least internally in NSR. You look at like an airplane, you know, like how many people are streaming Netflix, and is that a video play? Because I mean, they're all streaming Netflix, or is that a data play? And you're like, well, the satellite operator is just IP packets. Who cares where it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So,
if I, sorry.
Yes, no, go ahead, please, Joe.
No, I wanted just to piggyback on that, right? Because if there's one thing that as an industry, I think we should still strive to as well is to take better advantage of the capability of satellite to feed video and media in the network, right? Because we tend to think about the broadcast and it's important, right? It's live video, but let's face it, the habits are not there anymore. They are shifting more to consume media. So finding and optimizing the ways to deliver media, I think we need to get also to a scale and to optimize that. So that's also one of our missions as well, because now there's more tailor-made solutions, right? A maritime operator will have something and everybody has made something, but if we can bring it to scale and bring it to real solutions which can integrate with terrestrial, let's say, streaming environments and take advantage of that, I think this will help as well any player in the satellite industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this gets to kind of the transition between what we've kind of talked about right now and where you're seeing new growth and new applications. I think this is a perfect segue. And we actually have a great question for it. So Steve Richardson asks this question of, in response to COVID, there was lots of repurposing and changing of offerings, and kind of the product mix was changing. He mentions new mobility applications supporting helicopters, and expansion of the Hughes program, and all these other kinds of guys that have been talking about doing SATCOM through helicopter rotors, and how challenging that is from a modem perspective, right? Getting in those mod codes and stuff. So can you talk a little bit about expansion into new similar new opportunities that you're looking at? Maybe Joe, we'll start with you again. You talk about maritime, all these other kinds of things. Maybe not so focused on tech aero, but what new things are you seeing coming down the pike that you guys are planning for 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, well, the new things that we have seen, we already talked about that, right? A digital divide, the importance is increasing, but that's not new, but the importance is increasing. The digital transformation has taken a next step and a next acceleration as well, right? Because so many operations needed to happen remotely that automatically people start to think in that context, and that's something that we'll see, in our opinion, accelerating and continuing in many vertical markets, right? To that, and then I think also linked to that, for us, what we see is we talked about the 5G and the IT and the telco landscape. So the further standardization, making sure that we can blend into those architecture, that we seamlessly integrate into that. Yeah, that's for us what we see happening as well is key. And also it's again accelerated by the digital transformation because everybody is looking for the best possible way to achieve that, to achieve the scale, to achieve the operational efficiency to do that. And that's where we see our focus as well in terms of innovation is exactly to enable those type of things, right? So that we have software-defined satellites, we have software-defined ground systems, and we have software-defined networks, right? Because that's the future where we are heading to, is that there's an end-to-end seamless ecosystem of connectivity, whether it's satellite or terrestrial.
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, I want to focus kind of a similar question towards you of, what sort of new applications? I mean, maybe they're not really new, right? I mean, I don't think disaster response and rural broadband and all those other kinds of things are new. But have you seen more funding, more interest, more expansion, and maybe there are actual new applications that you're seeing? What are your kind of thoughts?
Well, I've, funnily enough, the last year, 8 months, I've been involved in 2 studies. So the first one was a European Space Agency study, where Eutelsat was one led consortium that won the tender to respond to that. And the title is Future Generation of a Satcom Infrastructure. So it wanted us to design future satellite infrastructure for the next 20 years plus, and I was in charge of the use cases for that particular project. And then the EU has launched a much bigger study, which is called Secure Space Connectivity, where we are part of a consortium with Airbus, Thales Alenia Space, SES, Hispasat, etc. So, it's on very similar things. What kind of satellite infrastructure would you envisage for the next 20, 30 years, and what is the design of that? What's the cost of that? And what are the benefits of that? And it's a fascinating study, and it's incredible that, firstly, European Space Agency came along, and then the European Commission came along and are funding these studies. So for me, it's really, for me, a great sign that politicians are recognizing the value of satellite, and they're recognizing that it could achieve huge things for their populations. And if you look at the EC thinking of its funding schedule, which they start to negotiate very soon, these studies are specifically for that, and that's a 7-year funding. And obviously with the EC, you're talking multi-billions of euros that they're prepared to, or looking at investing. And so for me, for the industry, I find that's possibly the most exciting move that I've seen in the last 12 months or whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, it seems like, civil governments are kind of recognizing the importance of satellite and actually putting some money behind it. And it's like real money, not just like, here's a couple $1,000 euros or a couple $1,000 to go do something interesting. And you kind of end up with results that are pretty similar to what we've been seeing. So Manik, I'm going to look at you, and we're going to open the 5G can of worms. So 5G, we published a 5G over satellite report, and it was probably one of the hardest reports that we had to scope, because there's 5G as an access technology that your cell phone will use to communicate with a base station. And then there's 5G as like an infrastructure management play that goes over your network and deals with all these kinds of stuff. So pick which side of the 5G you want to talk about, kind of define which areas, and can you walk us through how 5G is impacting your plans for Telesat and the Leo program?
Yeah, for sure. I'll address both the access side and the core side of what we are seeing. So from an access side, which is the phone talking to the 5G tower, and how is that impacting us, or how is it helping us? We are seeing the rise of 2 use cases with 5G. One is what you would call enterprise private networks, which is, say, a mine site wanting to have its own zone covered. And with 5G, you can create private networks. You don't have to rely on the mobile operator network. So we're seeing a lot of interesting discussions, especially from the satellite community. Energy markets are something that we serve. So that intersection is creating new opportunities in the market. And also from a fixed wireless backhaul perspective, earlier options were you use a Wi-Fi access point, or you unlicensed spectrum, or you put fiber in the community. Now 5G has opened up another possibility for the telco to serve remote communities if they're not too big and so forth. So an additional use case. It doesn't impact us because for us, we are still transporting the same traffic, but it has given our customers, the telcos, more toolkits or more options to use 5G and expand further. So that I think is a positive for the entire satellite industry. And then coming from the access side to your question as how do we use 5G internally and running our own network? I think 5G has highlighted the enterprise application of how wireless networks can serve enterprise applications better, especially in giving SLAs, concepts like network slicing. So you have a dedicated network slice, you get dedicated SLAs on latency and so forth, which only existed in the wired world so far. So we intend to do that with Telesat Leo, right? We will create, it's basically an enterprise-focused network. We are a B2B play. We are not a B2C play. But being focused on telcos and service providers, we will give them a slice of the network with dedicated resources and dedicated SLAs. So kind of mimics what telcos are trying to do with 5G. We'll have the similar concept. We won't use the same protocols or so forth, but it's the same end outcome for the customer.
Yeah, Joe, and I see you nodding your head a lot, and you're, kind of key in this whole ingredient of, standards-based, maybe having satellite behave a little bit better and function a little bit more like the rest of the terrestrial world. So I'm wondering how are you guys progressing on adopting quote open standards? And I'll put that in brackets, and you can define that how you'd like. But really being driven by this move towards 5G standard compliant core API enable whiz-bangy cool stuff.
Yeah, no, that's what we see is essential, and we see the demand coming from all the sides on that side, right? Because that's where everybody sees, like Manik was saying as well. Yeah, you need to be able to take advantage of those capabilities and do end-to-end service delivery, and then satellite needs to fit into that. So if you ask us, yeah, what do you think about standardization? We have always been very much in favor of standardization, right? We have been active in DVB-RCS and things like that. But where we see now the real opportunity on standardization is exactly to make sure that we kind of interface and blend into this 5G architecture, so that you can really deliver services flexibly, scalably, performance SLA-wise, right? So that it's not you have to do something special for satellite, but that really we do like a frictionless integration into the delivery of 5G type of architectures as they move forward, and they are coming forward as well. We see a lot of traction in the market to that. So that's where like you say, we are a critical part in the industry, but the good thing is that we start to have all the building blocks to enable it as well, because we have flexibility and space on the ground. And so we can now make it happen also if we really work hard on that as an industry.
Yeah, so I want to focus a little bit more on you, Joe. We had one great question, which was about IoT and terrestrial integration, and that's like a push-pull driver, right? If a lot of this kind of hesitation or resistance maybe of adopting satellite-based IoT is because IoT is focused more on just delivering the data and doing the analytics, and because we don't have great integration with terrestrial services, is there some friction there? So I think the question is kind of around the AWS, the Azures, all the cloud-based services, and their kind of integration with the satellite sector. How do you see your role in enabling that and kind of working with those terrestrial counterparts in kind of enabling an IoT value chain? And then Simon, I'd love to get your thoughts on that too.
Sorry, was a question for me?
Yeah, just playing with the terrestrial world.
Yeah. Okay. No, I thought you were asking Simon. Sorry for that. No. Exactly. Yeah, bringing the data to the application layer is crucial, right? And the cloud is playing a key role to that. So that's what's driving our customers as well. We see more and more cooperation between the cloud providers, as well as with service providers, with satellite operators as well. So we see a lot of things moving to the cloud. We see also, let's say, our technology is moving to the cloud. Today we are deploying our hubs infrastructure on private cloud. And yeah, the closer you are with the cloud, the more applications you can enable on top, right? So that's where we see the driver as well. But yeah, that's driven, like you say, as well by the application layer, right? Because yeah, nobody, let's say, in a lot of cases, it's not about satellite or terrestrial. It's just connecting your network connecting your application across satellite and terrestrial network and bringing all the data together, right? That's the mission typically for these type of end users.
Yeah. So Simon, kind of that same question of integration with the cloud and, those other providers, SES has announced some partnerships, Intelsat has announced some partnerships, and Intelsat has announced some partnerships. But how do you see playing with the cloud playing in, some of your experiences as part of some of the European, research groups that you're looking at, and expand that a little bit into, edge computing and other types of, cool terrestrial technologies and
Okay, well, it's not really my area. I'm happy to say that. I'm more on deployment. I'm an antenna engineer at base, but certainly, yes, no, it's the universal access that for me is first thing as a telecoms engineer. Satellite's the only thing that can give you universal access. So if you want to have that, across the globe, whether it's IoT, small data to moving huge lumps of data, only satellite can give you that. So we're going to offer, and also if you're thinking of inter-satellite links, then suddenly you're reducing time to your data centers, etc. You're also introducing strategic autonomy to your particular comms link if you own that constellation, if we're talking about Leo, for example. I think that's interesting. And no, for me at the moment, I start thinking when it comes to humanitarian, particularly applications, and they say we need to be nearer to the data center. And I'm like, well, first let's get everybody on Earth having more than 56 kilobit a second on the uplink. Why don't we think about that? And then let's go on to the other elements, because not everybody is like Silicon Valley with 500 megabits a second on the uplink, okay? And I think the Broadband Commission, the 2020 report said that in the highest level of human activity areas, so Europe and the US, for example, only 28% were connected with broadband fixed line. So that means 72% of us are not connected with broadband, okay? And cellular data is doing a lot, but cellular data is designed for exterior coverage, not interior. Where do you do most of your downloads? Inside, okay. Cellular is designed for the average consumption of about 3 gigabytes. An internal average consumption is 240 gigabytes. So the cellular industry is not scaled yet to supply broadband. So going back to the Broadband Commission report, there's only 28 of us really connected, 28% of us connected. I think let's concentrate on that first, and then go on to the higher level kind of applications at a later date.
Yeah, no, and I think that just highlights, that all of these markets are developing at different rates with different applications, and bringing this like one solution into the market probably isn't the best solution. It's that, if you give everybody the same box, well, maybe they don't need that box. They need to focus on kind of core problems if we steal, or first principles, right? Elon Musk likes to call them first principles. So Manik, I want to focus on you now. Same sort of question, edge computing in the enterprise space, huge conversations about edge computing. There was this huge move of, at least in oil and gas, there was always this conversation of removing the data centers off of the oil rigs because that was a center of pain and hardship. And now maybe are we getting back to, hey, we're going to put compute closer to the edge because we have robust links between the two to enable virtualized management of these data centers? Or how is that planning into your play here?
Mm-hmm. Oh, certainly we see that there's going to be an uptick of more processing, more intelligence at the edge, especially for the energy market, like you rightly mentioned. We are very humble in our ambition. We are focused on reducing the latency of the link because, yes, you can do only so much at the edge, but things have to work when they have to go back to the cloud. And all cloud applications are designed for a low latency environment. Not low latency like the ultra 5-10 millisecond level, but at least we are seeing 100 millisecond is is a good threshold, and not to exceed that round trip 100 millisecond. Because whether it's the security is another angle when it comes to cloud, a lot of enterprises are super focused on not exposed to the cloud and opening a security problem. So encryption of traffic becomes important. You need low latency again for encrypted traffic to flow through seamlessly. But so what we're doing is, in addition to, of course, the satellites coming closer, also deploying a global ground network, because you don't want to add latency on the ground. And of course, where we'll build and have customers connect to us should be in the major data centers where they can immediately, the next port, they can go onto the Azure cloud or the Google cloud. So that's what we are doing. Like I said, our humble position is to just focus on latency for now, because that's what we can control, and whether on the space or the ground, to remove anything that will add or reduce that latency number.
Yeah, so we coming towards the end here. We only have about 10 more minutes. So audience, if you're listening still, please come in with your questions. We will answer them either online here now, or we'll type them out. So focusing again, Manik, on you. You talk a little bit about this integration with terrestrial players, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to ask, what is your experience with telco players integrating infrastructure to, I mean, Leo gateways is the question specifically, but maybe that transition between your geo gateways and now your Leo infrastructure. Are there already initiatives, standards kind of established? How's that working out?
Yeah, I think Yo mentioned about Metro Ethernet Forum standards,
Yep.
because that is the language that telcos speak. 600 telcos and Silicon Valley companies have aligned that is the standard where we will interconnect networks with each other. So we are going along with what the world has decided, so that we don't create new standards and new complications. That's our game plan for that.
Cool. Joe, maybe add in some other thoughts there on the hub side.
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to come back as well on the edge side of things, right? Because I think it will remain a very important thing, because using the cloud is essential for everybody these days, for any business, right? We use it on a daily basis, but we know as well that because of cost and because of latency, you cannot just transfer everything over the satellite links, right? So you have to process certain things remotely, and even on other networks, it's the same thing. So this is also going to be a key factor as well moving forward, and doing some local processing of data using artificial intelligence, SD1 type of technologies. This is everything which will be kind of used on the edge compute side of things, which we also see as an important element moving forward in many verticals.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's, the edge compute cloud, all those other kinds of factors are really starting to come into the satellite play. And I don't know if that's, the promise of lower latency connections driving the attention, or just the recognition that connectivity should be ubiquitous and the demand for data is there. And, the monetization of cloud and all those other kinds of things are really, starting to take hold. So in the last 5 minutes here, I want to kind of hit a couple of rapid fire questions. We have some great questions on orbital debris that I don't necessarily know is in any of our wheelhouses, because, not lawyers, not focused on launching stuff, but hey, okay, if you want to talk about that, sure. Another one is on specifically for Telesat on OTT and those sorts of things. So we can answer that question, offline. But I guess one of the people I think asked the great closing question, and I'll put it up here live. It's from Bill Parsons. And I want to close with this. So thinking long term, he'd love to know where all the panelists think the connectivity industry is going next. So we've talked about GEO, we've done GEO, we've done MEO, we're talking about doing LEO. We're all focused on delivering connectivity solutions. But have we reached the end? Is it really just a matter of maintaining these networks and kind of just continuing to expand the ubiquity of connectivity? And I don't want to diminish how challenging that is, and Simon knows that very well of how challenging it is to kind of increase connectivity solutions. But what is everyone's thoughts about where we're going next? And Simon, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, it'll be multi-orbit systems. I think that's fairly clear that there is a lot of political pressure to push us into that. The issue that we have with large, dense layout fleets is obviously collisions, and how we keep space and exploitation of space as coupled with exploration of space clear. You know, how do we manage that? And bandwidth demand goes up 40% year on year. So, you know, just keeping pace with the increase in demand will mean that we have to be hugely innovative as an industry. And I think this is possibly the most exciting era for satellites that I've been in 20 years, because HTS is now version 2.0. You know, we possibly have LEO fleets that could supply broadband to consumers. I certainly think they'll supply broadband to SMEs. And you have, you know, potential huge IoT networks that will help humankind, whether it be fire, forest fire, or flooding, or whatever. So I think we will start to take our rightful position in the telecoms infrastructure, and we'll start to be recognized for the elements that we can bring. And I think that's why it's so exciting for me.
Right. No, I completely agree. Joe, how about you? What do you think's next?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, what we think is, like Simon was saying, it's multi-orbit. We always talk about 4 orbits, right? It starts with terrestrial, and then you add the 3 satellite orbits to that. I think that's going to be very crucial for the future. If we can find the right technologies that can blend in those 4 together in a simple way, right? That's the way forward for satellite to that. And 5G, I think, is a good starting point. I think it has still a long way to go. And like Manik was saying, on the antenna side, there's also still some track to go. But yeah, that really brings satellite as part of the ubiquitous coverage, in my opinion, if it's really a 4 orbit play without too much hassle at the end user side.
Yeah, no, and I think that's probably a great way to explain it. The 4 orbits, right? The 0th is terrestrial. And I think us in the satellite sector tend to forget that, right? But it's critical to be reminded. Manik, we'll close with you. What do you think's next? How's that shaping up for you?
I think I disagree with Bill's statement that we've reached a point. I think we're just at the start of it, because we have to change the discussion from technology to what you're saying, to come back to the ground and focus on the business model.
Yeah.
It's not great to have tons and tons of capacity in space, but you can't get to the end user, whether it's a community or the passenger on the aircraft. So I think there's going to be, over the next year or so, very innovative discussions around the business model, which includes both the terminal, but also how do you get the bit to the final user without, in a very simplified manner, and without breaking the bank, because that's what COVID has highlighted the focus of. You can't have any fat in the value chain. You are there if you add value, otherwise you get out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree there too. So, I mean, we've had a really great conversation. Hopefully the audience has enjoyed it. We have lots of questions still to answer, so I know all of us here on the panel have some homework to do. So stay tuned for the next GVF webinar. It's on February 18th at 3 p.m. GMT, 10 a.m. Eastern. Oddly enough, I'm hosting that one as well, so tune in. We'll have some great questions. Follow me on LinkedIn. You can ask questions there too. But no, thank you everybody for joining us. It's been some great pleasure. Thanks, Joe, Simon, and it's some really great insights. And stay tuned for the next webinar. Thank you everybody for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.